Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. Still on the E36. Obviously made really good progress so far. Engine's back in, the E36 M3 is in. However, we have a really worn out power steering system on this car. You know, the pulley's cracked, the hoses are leaking, you know, there's the steering rack itself is still kind of dirty, and the steering rack isn't even hooked up to the steering column. Hopefully today we'll be able to get all that stuff situated with brand new power steering hoses, brand new tie rods, the whole kit and caboodle. So follow along and we'll see how this goes. So first thing we're gonna do, this pulley down here is cracked, pretty nasty. The belt's on it, so it's gonna hold it in place. Just gonna break the nuts free. Next, we're going to get the belt off. Put the belt off to the side for now. Well, that's stuck on there. Interesting. Give it a little toot. We'll just go in there with a big dog pry bar, you know. God damn. Huh. I guess it's just freaking rust that's holding this thing on. It's a plastic pulley too. Wow. That's really stuck. Just freaking rust buildup. That's all it was. Oh, hell. Just gonna clean up this pump a little bit, and then we'll go on to the next steps. All right, next I'm gonna physically drain the system out. The suction hose is clamped on to the inlet of the power steering pump, which is right down here. God. Well, that was a struggle. All right, next up we got this big 22mm banjo bolt. This is one of the pressure hoses. Yeah, looking at these hoses, I don't think they've ever been replaced. So, we'll go ahead and get the reservoir out of here. It's held with a couple of clamps. And this thing's probably been leaking for a long time. It's just nasty. All right, that's going to give us access to both the pressure line as well as the return line. So this right here is the pressure line. This comes out of the pump, goes into the rack, and then there's another line that comes out of the rack. There's a cooling coil up front. So one of these is a 19 and a 22 on the rack. So and it shouldn't take too much to get them loose. Probably gonna lose some hydraulic fluid here, so it's ATF on this system. So just have the bucket underneath. Right there is our pressure hose from the pump to the rack. And the other one is the return hose, which has an integrated cooling coil on it. Now, I'm planning on doing the Chase Bays kit eventually, but in the interest of getting this car on the road, I'm just going to put stock components back in, see how well they hold up under a high stress environment, and you know, it'll be interesting comparison. Then last but not least, we got two 10s, however missing one of the 10s that holds the cooling coil, and this is part of the return hose. So we have all the hoses out now. Next, I'm gonna most likely pull the steering rack, clean it up a little bit more. And I also want to get the steering column hooked back up. So quite a bit of work to do, but you know, it needs to be done. I kind of figured while I'm just doing the power steering system in general, should just be doing it, period. Getting everything hooked back up. So I'm pulling the steering rack. First thing to do this is we got to get the tie rods off. In my case, I'm removing them entirely. Replacing this side. The right side was brand new as of last year, still in good shape. I have a jack under it to prevent the stud from spinning. This is a tapered joint, but it's not really held in by much. They come out pretty easily. I can't really tell you the nut size because that's going to completely vary depending on the brand of tie rod you have installed. And then all you need is some big channel locks. It should come loose pretty easily. And this tie rod assembly I'm just replacing. It's junk. There we go. Dunsky. Alright guys, so it's a completely different day. I had to cut filming while I was removing the steering rack because I found that that particular steering rack has a serious leak at the end seal on the left hand side. So really no way that I could have reused it. It was pretty much screwed. With that said, you'll see that I just kind of test fitted a new rack in there. And that's a remanufactured TRW rack, but it's a Z3 steering rack. So just a regular Z3 Roadster or Z3 Coupe, not the Z3M Roadster M Coupe. And that is going to have a slightly quicker steering ratio than the stock steering rack that came on the 328s and the M3s. So a little bit of an upgrade. I was originally going to do that later on when I changed all the power steering hoses and stuff out to AN. Like I was going to do like another steering upgrade, but well, quite frankly, at this point, once I found that damage, it made absolutely no sense to even hold that off and just to get the new rack, which is exactly what I did. But I'm going to show you how to, get the rack in, hook up the steering coupler, put the steering column back together, and all that good stuff. Also, we're going to install the new power steering hoses and all that stuff today as well. So it's going to be a good video. And, like I said, I had to do that hard cut in the middle of this because when I found that problem with that rack right there, had to push it off a couple days. So enough talking, let's get started. Alright, to install the steering rack, we need to take the steering wheel out. The reason for this is we're going to reinstall the steering wheel after the steering rack and the steering column have been connected again. And then you need to reorient the steering wheel to straight ahead position. There is no mark to center it. You can kind of put it on whatever spline that you want. So, and then it's a 16 millimeter bolt that holds the steering wheel to the upper steering column. Okay, that was really loose. That's not good. Well, we'll definitely make sure that we torque that to spec when we put it back together. There we go. It's that easy to take the steering wheel out. When we put this back together, we're going to have to, make note of a couple things, but we'll get to that when we get to that. First thing I'm going to do is get the steering shaft reinstalled onto the upper column, which you see right back there. There's different lower steering shafts. I have a 4-rib corrugated shaft. I don't think it really makes that much of a difference. I guess there's 3 different versions. You can have a collapsible lower column. You can have a 4-rib or an 8-rib. The 4-rib and the 8-rib go in the same. But basically the orientation of this, when it's neutral, it should be sitting in there like this with the bolt side facing down. However, I don't need to install it like that. What I can do is, I have a screwdriver wedged in there right now to open this up, but I can install it all the way back, right? And then when I actually go to hook it up to the lower coupler, move it back in the position it needs to be in, and that'll just make it easy. Next up, we're going to get the steering rack ready for installation. You'll see I've made these paint marks right here. This is the neutral position of the rack. Basically, it's just this cover here, and this has to line up, and that means that the rack is basically in the steer head position. Next, I need to install the lower steering coupler. Now, this is kind of off, or kind of strange, because this gets installed. You would think it would go straight on, but rather it gets installed with this mark to the right of the edge of this lower coupling. The short side goes in first. Not 100% sure why they did it that way. I assume it has to do with something with this disc flexing. That's my best guess. So we're going to align it to the right. Ah, man, these things suck to put on. And also, this bolt will be facing down like that. I have knocked it down a little bit of distance just to give myself some room to get it into, basically get it into position. But should go in relatively smoothly. I am just going to use a little bit of anti-seize here, again, just to act as a lubricant as this thing is going in. But we should be able to get this rack in now. Steering rack's at the neutral position where it needs to be. So at this point, just need to start tightening down the bolts on the steering column. Also get the bolts in for the steering rack, and that will be in. All right, 19 Newton meters is the torque on these fasteners. I'll do my best to get access to them. It is somewhat restricted though. All right, got all the steering column bolts torqued. Torque spec on the steering rack bolts is 42 Newton meters. Well, now that we have the new Z3 steering rack in and the steering column hooked back up, we now need to hook up all of the hydraulics. And I was originally planning on going with stainless steel lines with AN fittings. I was really looking at the Chase Bays kit. I probably will end up doing that later on, but just to sort of speed the process of this build along and kind of keep the budget within reason for the time being, just going to be reinstalling all this OE stuff. So most of the stuff is Rhine branded, so it's repackaged CRP stuff. I have an OE power steering reservoir. It's all real basic stuff. All new crush washers and banjo bolts, and those are pretty much all the sizes I'm going to need to install all of this. So should be pretty straightforward getting this in, And once the stuff is in, I'm not going to be filling the system today. We're doing that at a later date when I refill everything with fluids. But in the meantime, the point is just to get this installed, ready to go. The new steering rack had these caps on it. I'm just going to take these caps off. I'm going to hold on to them because they could be useful later on. Alright, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install the pressure line from the pump to the inlet of the rack. These have two different fittings on each sides. I forget the sizes off the top of my head, but you know, the banjo bolts will only fit one way, so it kind of makes it easy to figure that out. So, interesting enough, BMW switched away from old copper washers to aluminum. I like the aluminum a little bit better. They don't deform as easily. In my opinion, makes a little bit of a better seal, plus it doesn't corrode either. All I'm going to do is just get this started by hand. I'm not going to tighten anything down yet. I want to position everything in the place that it's going to want to naturally rest. I don't want to put any undue strain on any of these connections, because technically that could cause a leak later on. This is our return and cooling coil hose. So this connects to the rack over in this area. This cooling coil cools down the fluid and then it sends it back to the reservoir. And then we have our power steering suction hose. So this takes fluid from the reservoir and it brings it down to the pump. To make installation of this hose a little easier, just gonna a little bit of silicone spray. And that seats perfectly. So now we have our return and our suction hose for the power steering system. Everything is kind of where it wants to be at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look up the torque specs for the banjo fittings. I'm going to torque those first. And then once those are torqued, I can go ahead and get the power steering reservoir installed along with the power steering reservoir bracket. So we have two different banjo sizes on this system. There's two M16s and one's an M14. The M14 is 35 newton meters. The M16s are going to be 40. So we're doing the M14 first, which is going to be torqued to 35 newton meters. And that's for the inlet on the steering rack from the pump. So for the pressure hose, and then the M14s are torqued to 40 newton meters. Those are a 22 millimeter head. The M14 was a 19 millimeter. I don't think I said that. On the power steering reservoir, there's a small inlet and the large outlet. There's a small outlet and a large inlet. The large inlet is for the return hose, and the small inlet is for the suction hose. Yeah, come on, get on there. I know you probably weren't able to see too much, but this is where the power steering reservoir stands. This is the clamp, so it's pretty much clamped into place. Here's the pressure hose from the power steering pump to the rack, and then you can see the other fitting down there. That's the cooling line, which goes all the way around the outside here and then returns all the way back to the underside here of the reservoir. And then here's the suction hose from the bottom of the reservoir all the way to the inlet of the power steering pump right there. So it's just a 3-hose system, not very complicated. Obviously when you install, just make sure there's no interference with any of the components and you should be good. Also, one thing I noticed, the original rack had, let's see, where was it? Yeah, so the original rack has 2 mounting locations for that cooling coil. The Z3 rack does not. So it looks to be, well, it should be a little bit shorter. So I'm gonna have to come up with some kind of solution for that, because I don't really like how that's just sitting there. I also still need to tighten down that 10 mil there, but I would like this to be kind of affixed a little bit better than that. So I'm gonna have to come up with a solution. See if I can find, you know, some kind of clamp that sits over here that I could put a nut cert into. I don't know. I'll think of something, but that's kind of what we're looking at right here. Overall, real clean, very simple installation. Didn't take too long at all. And I like to follow the torque specs on those banjo fittings just to make sure that everything is tight the way it should be. But other than that, only thing that's going to be left to do has been getting rid of these inner tie rod ends that were included with the steering rack, and I'm putting on different ones. Also, just to show you again, right here is the neutral marking for the rack. So when those are lined up, the rack is dead centered. I just checked everything again just to make sure, and everything is fine the way that it should be. So I'm pretty confident that the rack has been installed properly. All I'm gonna have to do really is reinstall that steering wheel, but I'm gonna do that later. It's not really a priority right now. For now, just gonna get these inner tie rods and the steering rack bellows off and swap them with what I want to put on. And I'll just hold on to these as spares. You know, they'll be perfectly fine for use later on. And if you ever question how sharp the jaws are in Knipex pliers, yeah, they bite in without a doubt. Okay, nice. These crimping pliers are badass. I know I've already said that, but they're freaking badass. What I like about them is the fact that they don't feel like they're slipping on the clamp at any given point. And you always get a nice, tight, consistent crimp. Get a nice, tight crimp. And obviously the anti-seize will prevent it from corroding together and making it impossible to do adjustments, but I do plan on making a lot of toe adjustments on this car once it's up and running. And you know, I would like this to sort of be a situation where it's copper anti-seize, so it's non-galling, or it helps prevent metal galling. If you're constantly moving stuff around, you want it to be able to move freely and not run into any problems. So I'm hoping, you know, with the application of that stuff, it'll help reduce any potential problems in, you know, moving forward. So I'm just gonna leave this like this for now, because after this I got to work on the suspension. Literally tearing all of these wishbones out. The knuckles are being replaced. All of that stuff is being replaced. So I'm not going to hook this up for now. I'm just going to let it droop here for now. And I will want to make an adjustment a little bit later on to you know, once I have an idea where it's got to be, that's where I'll probably set it to initially. But, you know, regardless, a front toe adjustment is going to happen anyway. So I'm not focused on getting this perfect right now. Well, that's refreshing the entire steering system on an E36. Obviously, the only thing I have not reinstalled at this point is the steering wheel. I'll be doing that later date. It's just going to make it easier for me to do stuff behind the dash and everything like that. So just leaving it out for now, but it'll be easy to put back in. Obviously, all brand new parts. You know, we have the new steering rack, all the new steering hoses. The only thing that's in there is the power steering pump. That was original, but there was nothing wrong with it, so there's no need to replace it. Only difficult part was getting that steering coupler to interface with the steering shaft, but once it kind of lined up, it was fine. But other than that, it's not too bad. I'll link information in the description in regards to how stuff needs to be oriented when it's installed. I'll put torque specs down there as well for all the key stuff, as well as links to the products. But outside of that, I'll also throw my Instagram account in there as well, so you'll be able to follow me on Instagram. I have more frequent updates on there than I really do on YouTube. It's obviously easier to take a photo than it is to edit a whole video. Other than that, hope you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave in the comment box below. Like the video if you liked it. Also hit subscribe if you want to see more videos like this. This channel's just getting started. But other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you for the next one. Later, guys.